Thank you so much, Dan, for the invitation, and thank you so much for allowing me, giving me the opportunity to present some preliminary data and information about my new research that I'm still developing in Argentina. So, I would like to tell you a little bit about my research interest before I begin my presentation. I am a political ecologist interested in nature-society relationships. My research interest in human-environmental interactions is motivated by a strong desire to understand and explain how processes of access to and control over resources, specifically oil and natural gas resources, reproduce spaces of social and ecological distress at different scales. In particular, my research critically explores changing patterns of human-environment interaction in the context of fossil fuels production, extraction, and transformation in Latin America. Empirically, my research analyzes three interrelated processes. First, the sociopolitical struggles over resource development. Second, the multiscalar interconnections of the material flows of natural resources, where they are produced, how they are transported, how they flow from one place to the other, and following that path allows you to identify the specific social and ecological impacts that happen at each stage of production. And third, I'm interested in the socio-ecological transformations associated with resource extraction industries and their impacts upon vulnerable communities. Through in-depth case study analysis, for about 11 years in Venezuela and now developing this new research in Argentina, my work seeks to contribute to current empirical and theoretical debates among political ecologists and critical resource geographers regarding the institutional forms and geographic scales of extractive industries, especially oil and gas, the relationship that exists between political, economic, and socio-environmental transformations, the risk and conflicts produced by resource extraction activities at different geographic scales, and environment-related social marginalization. So as a nature society geographer who's interested in the political processes associated with extracting resources, I'm interested in what happens when the different crises that a capitalist system produces in the way in which resources are extracted and transformed into something of value, whether it is money or whether it is something else for social uses, such as fertilizers, pesticides, etc. And so I depart from the perspective, from a critical lens, so my training is is a critical perspective, ecological Marxism. I am not a Marxist, I don't have a political agenda, but I find that theoretical framework fascinating to understand and explain why these contradictions happen. And not only why they happen, but why they happen at multiple scales and how they are all interrelated. And so, along those lines, then, I looked at different processes. So, for example, how nature is not only an area where things just happen, has no agency. As a political ecologist, we believe that nature imposes obstacles of production and pressures and surprises for production. But on the other hand, political systems and economic systems find sources of opportunities to make these resources work harder for them. So those are the things that I'm interested in. So one final word about the research I'm about to present. This is a new research, which is still in its development stages. The data presented here is based on exploratory research conducted during the summer of 2015, winter there. So that's why you can see that. It's dark and cold, and there's no leaves. So for me, this feels like the longest winter of my life. So I started, winter for me started in July. And I'm going back again in July, so it's going to be even longer. But, I feel I'm grateful for this opportunity. I think that what we do as researchers is really fascinating. When you have the opportunity to do research in things that you really like, you're interested, go to really cool places, even if you're below zeros and temperatures. But that's a topic for a different talk. So, In this research, I adopted a mix of ethnographic research methods that include semi-structured interviews, participatory observation, archival work, and document analysis. And a second visit will happen in July, in which I will expand my sample size and will focus all of my effort in the community itself. So here's the outline. I will give you a little bit of an intro on my research, then present the theoretical framework and some of the concepts that I'm using to analyze and conceptualize these processes on the ground. I'm going to talk a little bit about the methods that I use in more detail, and then I'm going to provide some political economic context of what happened in the past that created this scenario. And then I'm going to briefly explain what's going on now and then move to Vaca Muerta, which is the extraction area, and the community of Añelo, and then provide some preliminary concluding remarks. In 2012, President of Argentina, Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, announced Decree number 1277, which established new procedures that ruled operations of domestic market of hydrocarbons in the country. With the approval of this decree, the president regained 51% control of Yacimientos Petrolíferos Fiscales. From this point on, I'm going to refer to that as YPF. That's the National Oil Company of Argentina. YPF is the oil and gas company that was privatized in 1993 and bought by Spain's Repsol in 1999. The nationalization of the oil and gas industry in Argentina is part of President Kirchner's call for energy sovereignty of the country. This decision was the result of a series of reports published by the Energy Information Agency of the United States in 2011, 2012, and 2013, pointing to Argentina's large unconventional shale gas deposits in Vaca Muerta in the province of Neuquén. Kirchner's move to nationalize YPF triggered a series of explorations and extraction activities of unconventional deposits of shale oil and shale gas in Argentina, especially in the province of Neuquén in northern Patagonia. Today, Argentina is considered to have one of the largest shale gas deposits in the world, with an estimated 802 trillion cubic feet of recoverable shale gas resources. Now, I want you to keep in mind here on the back of your head, recoverable is a key word here. Another idea that I want you to keep in mind is the differences between resources and reserves. We'll get to that later, because that gets to the source of a problem in Argentina right now. Hydraulic fracturing raises a host of multi-level and multi-resource governance challenges because the process involves numerous resources: water, salt, land, chemicals, and people, whose access and usage management rights are controlled by separate agencies located at different tiers of government, so national, provincial, municipal. As such, hydraulic fracturing is a key example of the multi-scalar and political economic nature of energy resources because of the interlinked social and environmental impacts that this industry poses to energy, water, land, and people. As a geographer, I'm interested in scale, place, interconnections at different scales. And so the multi-scalar nature of energy resources requires a new analytical method to evaluate their socio-ecological impacts, especially in communities located near extraction sites such as Añelo, as a way to inform environmental governance in the region, how different policies are created to control and govern not only how these resources are going to be extracted, but also how they're going to be transformed and transported, and how the revenue generated from that is going to be distributed. So the overarching objective of my research is to explore the political economy of hydraulic fracturing in the Vaca Muerta Shale deposit in the province of Neuquén in northern Patagonia, Argentina. In particular, my research will study the social and environmental impacts associated with hydraulic fracturing in the region, especially the community of Añelo, where the large majority of the infrastructure to support fracking activities is being developed. This research incorporates political ecology and critical resource geography in order to understand the different forces governing these resources. In doing so, this research adopts political ecology and political economy, a process that I'm going to explain in the next slide, and the strategies that the government used to control underground resources. My hope is that by analyzing these relationships between national strategies to secure energy sovereignty, provincial government responses to adapt to these changes, and everyday life of citizens in Argentina's community of Añelo, this extensive and empirically grounded analysis will illuminate the myriad complexities inherent to issues of access to and control over shale deposits, the way in which shale and natural gas is commodified and transformed into things that can be used, and the socio-ecological impacts associated with their extraction, transportation, and distribution. In general, I seek to answer three interrelated questions, and these are: what political factors and energy policies shape hydraulic fracturing activities and hydraulic fracturing governance in Argentina? 2, what are the social and environmental implications of fracking in the region? And 3, how are citizens from the community of Añelo responding to these impacts? And so, as a geographer and as a social scientist, I'm interested in what happens above ground, not just what happens below ground where these deposits are contained. I'm not interested about, although it's important, but I'm not interested about how can you extract it, how can you make the process more efficient. I'm interested in what happens with the people above ground and how political and economic forces either affect or shape how this relationship happens. And so to do that, I use political ecology and political economy as it applies to nature. So from a political ecology perspective, methodologically speaking, I am interested in a bottom-up approach. That is, I go in and I interview people, I talk to people, I collect the data, I do focus groups, I collect different, I access different archives, I do participatory observation as a way of gaining fine-grained, high-resolution data that otherwise won't be produced. It is labor-intensive. Sample sizes are not as big as if you were doing quantitative type of analysis with 1 million, 2 million, 3 million entries. But this allows you to ask the hard questions of why certain things happen the way they do on the ground. And I'm interested in political ecology of processes of marginalization, why certain people get displaced by specific processes. I'm also interested in environmental degradation. Environmental degradation is not just the result of drilling and affecting water. Environmental degradation is not just produced by drilling itself. It's actually the result of decisions that happen at a larger scale. I'm also interested in uneven power relations. And so the way in which the economic system works, in this case Argentina, shapes how good things and bad things happen, and who receives the benefits and who receives the negative aspects associated with this activity. From a political economy perspective, on the other hand, as it applies to nature, I'm interested, methodologically speaking, from a top-down approach. So in this case, I'm now trying to understand how policies that are being created, different economic strategies adopted, and different laws that are being created and enforced shape processes that happen on the ground. And I'm interested in what happens when these bottom-up and top-down approaches converge. What's the scenario that is being produced at that particular moment as it relates to fracking activities? From a political economic perspective, from ecological Marxism, also I'm interested in the relationships between a capitalist system and the environment. So specifically what I'm referring to with this is I see land as a factor of production as a process that transforms natural resources, and the transformation of natural resources that produce pollution and waste, and a process that it happens on uneven power relationships, which in turn creates the distribution of goods and bads, that is, pollution or who receives money is distributed unequally. And from a political economic perspective, we depart that this is a structural problem with the economic system itself that is crisis-ridden, that has contradictions, and produces certain moments of stress, such as environmental pollution, displacement, etc. So that's the angle I take. That's the analysis I give. Now, the methods I use. I did semi-structured interviews. Semi-structured because I did not want to lead the answers. I have a specific set of questions that I ask the same to each of my subjects or informants, and I allowed them to just expand in their answer. And I did this to 39 individuals, to government officials, scholars, environmental activists, representatives from energy companies, members of the community of Añelo, and lawyers, specifically energy lawyers. I also did archival work in different universities in both Buenos Aires and Neuquén. The same with the semi-structured interviews, Buenos Aires and Neuquén. I dig the archives of the Ministry of Energy, local newspaper companies, YPF, environmental NGOs, etc. And then I did this document analysis, specifically by looking and coding the information with a lens of looking at discourse and rhetoric. So what is being said, and try to understand what is concealed in the message. And then participatory observation. So go to the fracking activities, go to community meetings, energy conferences, and observe, either by a distant observer or participating with them in different activities, which gives you a better idea of their day-to-day lives. So this is, in order to understand what's happening today, we need to go back in time and understand what happened in the past. So in the 90s, Argentina went through a process of neoliberalization under the Carlos Menem administration. And during that time, Carlos Menem decided to adopt neoliberal economics. So I know that you know this, but in case there's anybody here that is not familiarized with neoliberal economics, I will try and do my best to simplify it in a way that makes sense. The neoliberal economics was created by Milton Friedman from the Chicago School of Economics, and he won the Nobel Prize for that. It was initially implemented in Chile by what is known as the Chicago Boys, Chileans that were trained in the Chicago School of Economics, that adopted it during the Pinochet administration, during the dictatorship. And so during that time, Latin America experienced a lot of neoliberal economics applied to different countries. In Argentina, it meant the privatization of government in order to reduce government intervention in the market. And with the idea that by privatizing, you're going to increase competition and efficiency. But that's the rhetoric and the discourse of the idea. What happens in reality might be different. And so in this case, the privatization process started, a devaluation of the currency began, then they dollarized everything. They started to solve for devaluation in order to, by adopting the dollar as the main currency. And they sold YPF when it was nationalized. So they sold it to Repsol. The interesting thing about that is that it followed inflation, and by selling Repsol, not only the resources that were owned by the country left with that sale, so now Argentina doesn't have the resources that they always had in the past. So even though they had oil on the ground, they didn't own the oil. By selling Repsol, by selling YPF to Repsol, they sold their reserves. So people refer to that as the drain of our resources. Then that was followed by a low economic investment in the economy. And then they sold the fossil fuel resources to foreign companies. That meant then a reduction in production rates, which in turn triggered disincentivized the exploration activities. Very chaotic. Very chaotic. So imagine, and of course, as you might know, Argentina went through several processes. For example, there was a year in which the president was ousted several times, and different presidents were sworn. They were in total debt to the International Monetary Fund, the valuation of the currency. It was the seventh circle of hell, if you think about it. It was really interesting moment. So now let's fast forward. So what's the current scenario? So currently, there is a structural problem with the currency exchange system in Argentina. For instance, every foreign investment has to go through the central bank of Argentina to exchange to local currency in pesos. Okay, so I am Delgado company and I just extract And I go to Argentina and I want to open business in Neuquén. So I bring all of my money, I bring all of my capital, my equipment and my people, and I go in, but I have to exchange dollars into pesos. The problem is that that exchange works for the government, but not for me, because the barrel is sold in dollars. And all of the result of my investment is sold in dollars, yet I am operating under a pesos that is devalued. So it doesn't incentivize my investment in that area. So in order to understand challenges associated with political and economic interest in the hydrocarbon sector, we need to consider this structural problem. In this sense, the consequences are a decrease in foreign investment into the hydrocarbon sector in the areas of exploration, perforation, transportation, and distribution. Another problem has to do with the price of natural gas. Remember, we're talking about fracking, both shale oil and shale gas, but especially natural gas, because that's the main resource of Vaca Muerta. So, in the 90s, as I explained, the economy of Argentina ran in dollars. This process changed to pesos as a strategy to move away from the dependency of foreign currency. However, the Argentinian currency has been going through a constant devaluation over the last 13 years. This devaluation have had devastating effects in the gas industry. For instance, even though the consumer pays the utility bill in pesos, so when we pay our bill, all right, we pay it in dollars, they pay it in pesos, the utility companies still calculate the price of this commodity, including investments associated with transportation, distribution, and other costs of production, in dollars. In addition, all contracts between the companies and the government are calculated in dollars. And when the government decides to shift back to pesos, and with the devaluation over the last 13 years, the consequences to the gas industry has been devastating. Just to put it in perspective, today, the price of gas to the consumer is cheaper than a pack of cigarettes in Argentina. Yet, the price for the companies is in dollars. So then, there's no incentive to invest. So that's something else that is happening. And in addition to that, then you have, that created that situation, in addition to the renationalization of YPF by the president, created a landscape of uncertainty and distrust from foreign investors. Consumer prices, just to give you an idea, 26.9% inflation year on year. The rate averaged 203% from 1944 to 2015. The bottom line is very expensive. Very expensive. And so there's something else that is very interesting. And as a result of this, the government decided to pass a law to subsidize the barrel of oil. So right now, who knows what the barrel of oil, the price of barrel of oil recently?
$32 yesterday.
$32, right?
35 today.
So, okay, in Argentina, if I am this company facing all of this stuff, there's a subsidy that tells me, but when you extract oil, we're going to pay you at $77 per barrel. Okay, so Argentina did this several years ago, expecting that the barrel was never going to decline from $80. And now they have to deliver. So, yes, it's a very difficult situation. So that oil subsidy also is another variable that complicates the process. So, when I asked about this to an energy lawyer, the informer said, there is so-called incentive program that was promoted and sanctioned by Congress and the national government by force and out of necessity. However, this happened in a macroeconomic context that was based on incredulity and insecurity from the judicial apparatus. In other words, it doesn't matter if you create a perfect law, because the insecurity created by previous events and actions by the government in the energy sector creates distrust among the judicial apparatus and foreign investors. So this political and economic landscape diminished the incentives to attract foreign investment, which exacerbates the process even further. So I'm going to stop right now, and I want to show you what's going on in terms of, like, let's look at kind of figures, right? So this is the primary energy production. About less than 1.5 quadrillion BTUs in 2014. In 2014, let's say 2013 was similar. Yet the amount they need, the consumption, is 3.5 quadrillion. So they're running on a deficit. So when the United States Energy Information Agency in 2011 said, okay, so now we're seeing a change in the energy landscape. They always write this report at the end of every year letting everybody knows what's up, like what's going on in the energy field. Who has what, how many reserves do we have, etc. They said, now we are being able to push peak oil because now we are investing in unconventional deposits. Unconventional deposits are energy resources that have always been there, but for many different reasons were not considered part of the equation because they were either very difficult to extract, extremely expensive to do so. Maybe they were in areas very difficult to access, either deep underground or in the Orinoco belt in the Amazon, etc. But they found a different technology, and there's the need of accessing that. And we experienced that in the United States with the gas boom that we had as a result of hydraulic fracturing activities in different deposits, such as the Marcellus Shale in Pennsylvania or the Bakken Field in North Dakota. And having a surplus of natural gas then changes the geopolitical landscape. So when the Energy Information Agency said, and by the way, Argentina has the third largest deposit in the world, the president of Argentina said, bingo, this is what we need to do. We have an energy deficit, we need energy. And one of the things they're doing is that in order to meet that demand, during the winter especially, they import liquefied natural gas. They spend $16 billion a year importing liquefied natural gas. And so, but she knew that even though Argentina owned the resources, she had to change the law to nationalize the industry that was privatized and sold in 1999 to have control, 51% control over how these resources were going to be governed. And so this is another, so kind of a weird, on a national scale in terms of energy. Let's look at what's going on in more detail. This is oil and natural gas production decline because of the structural problems and historical events that I explained. This is the investment by two companies, Total and YPF. So they've been investing heavily. And in 2013, it spiked because then Argentina is on the hot spot. The world is just looking at Argentina right now. 802 trillion cubic meters. So let's move to Vaca Muerta. So Robert Hickey, apologies for the map. I haven't had the time to sit down and make one myself. But at least a location map so you know where this area is located. So Argentina is divided in provinces. Just imagine United States and different states, right? And so you have the national government, different provinces that equal state, and then municipalities within those provinces. Now, the way in which the energy law works is that each province owns the right to make laws, and they have control over the deposits. So right now, each province is creating different laws, which creates a problem of inconsistency in the way in which tariffs, rates, interest rate, all of that stuff is happening. But from all of Argentina, Neuquén is the big boy. This is where Vaca Muerta is located. So let's look at the deposit itself. The deposit, which is all of this shadow area underground, is about 30,000 square kilometers. And YPF has an active participation of 16,000 square kilometers of that. So now you're probably thinking, okay, but wait a second. So they nationalized the YPF. It's in Argentinian soil. So how come YPF only owns 16,000 square kilometers? Well, when they decided to nationalize YPF, you need to understand that YPF is owned by a lot of people. They nationalized a third of all of that. that give them active participation over 16,000 square kilometers. So who owns Vaca Muerta? Okay, so give an idea. YPF, this is Pan American, Total, Petrobras, Exxon, Barclay, Chevron, that's the last one. Shale, Apache, this is like, and there's way more companies now. And so let's look at the activity itself. Like fracking activities are very interesting because when you compare fracking activities or the extraction of shale deposits with conventional sources, is regular oil or regular natural gas, just so you can understand the differences. When you're digging or drilling conventional deposits, the well itself has, or the deposit has, mix of oil and natural gas, sometimes one, sometimes the other, but it has pressure. You just drill, and the pressure takes the whole the resource out. In this particular case, it is an unconventional deposit because there are particles of oil and natural gas that are trapped in sedimentary rock. In Vaca Muerta, it is 1,500 kilometers down. And so, just to give you an idea, drilling one conventional source is about $1 million per oil well. Drilling this one is about $16 million. The moment, in terms of the time it takes for oil to start to flow, in a conventional is very short. And once you start drilling, you can extract for a long time. Unconventional deposits, specifically in Vaca Muerta, it takes a long time because you need to keep drilling and drilling and drilling and drilling and drilling. And once you get into it and you tap it, then it goes away like that. And so now the government not only has an energy deficit and an economic deficit, but they don't have the expertise to do this. So what do? They change the law and allows a bunch of companies to come in from all over the world. And the last one that they did, the last agreement was with Chevron. They called that the secret agreement. Congress forced the company in YPF to release the result. They didn't. Do you know who released the terms of that contract first? The New York Times released it. And that's another topic, but it's very complicated. Now, you drill, and then you have the sedimentary rock, and then you do horizontal drilling. You drill, and then you detonate with dynamite. You frack the sedimentary rock, and then you put a case. You get everything out. You put a casing to protect that drilling process, and then you inject pieces of silica. And so now the silica gets, sometimes in the process of injecting silica, the workers, even though they're using masks, and this is happening in the United States as well, are breathing silica that attach in the lungs, so they're getting silicosis. And so the particles of silica and other components keep the fractures open, allowing natural gas to flow, or oil to flow for that matter. Then they inject millions of gallons of water and chemicals in order to, what they call, the word in English is, in order to, well, the translation is to excite. They want to excite the deposit, meaning they want to make the deposit to be able to move all of those reserves above ground. But with it, when they get all that backflow, then they need to find out where they're going to put those hundreds of millions of gallons of water and chemicals in other areas. So Neuquén is the source of contention as a result of protest, economic boom, environmental impacts, and conflicts resulting from fracking activities in the province. The city of Neuquén is also the site for provincial governmental agencies, ministries, and offices. And it is also the location of provincial research centers, universities, non-governmental organizations, and environmental organizations. So this is a blog from Apache. It's a Canadian company. And each company has their own perfect recipe of how they're going, what's the cocktail of things that they use. This is Chevron, another one. Now, what are some of the problems that they're facing? very similar to the United States in terms of issues about the environment, issues about water contamination, issues about people who live near extraction sites. But the interesting thing about this is that the only community living near the extraction site is Añelo, a community that only had 3,000 inhabitants, a population of 3,000 in 2011. Today, it has 15,000 inhabitants. So it's a boom town. So the first problem is protest. Just like any other parts of the world, like United States and the European Union, fracking presents a series of social and ecological problems associated with water contamination, destruction of sensitive ecosystems, displacement, and marginalization. This extraction activity has been the center of protest in Buenos Aires, but especially in Neuquén. The actors leading the protests are representatives from the Mapuche indigenous communities, but also civil society in general, and workers' unions. Of course, each member has their own general claim. The Mapuches feel that they have been displaced from the original place of origin. One member of the Mapuches, when I asked this question, stated, "We were displaced from our land. The government is not considering our needs and our way of life. We want to have an active role in the decision-making process. We also need compensation from the land we lost, the dead animals, and polluted water." This statement demonstrates that two things. One, that on the one hand, the Mapuches are concerned about the environment and health. You know, they want to be compensated by that process. But also, they're not that opposed to the activity itself. They just want to be part of the decision-making process. So that's one of the claims that they're making. So this is a photo I'm taking. You remember the photo, the first slide on the presentation? So now I'm on top of that mountain looking down. So this is the town of Añelo at the bottom. So you can see it's northern Patagonia. It's very similar to Ellensburg. It's very windy, dry, and then they bring water to the area using channels. This is another view from the top. Now, the municipality of Añelo is located 62 miles northwest of Neuquén. It's the epicenter of fracking activities. This is the place where many foreign oil companies such as Chevron, Total, Halliburton, Apache, Schlumberger, ConocoPhillips, and BP set up their offices and develop fracking activities. The town of Añelo is the perfect example of a boom town. Its population has exploded from 3,000 in 2011 to 15,000 in 2015. This, together with these socio-ecological impacts associated with fracking activities, is negatively affecting members of the community in many ways. So one of the things that I was trying to ask was to the municipality, okay, but listen, so the province owns the resources, they're extracting this in your town, you're experiencing these processes, what's going on? I mean, you're probably making money. So when I asked about this, they said, we know that the municipality will see the economic benefits later. At least, that is the message we get from the province. The problem is that we need the money now. We need to invest in the infrastructure. Añelo can't deal with the amount of people coming in, referring to all of this, all over the country are coming into Añelo. When I asked about what type of specific problems to another informant, the person said, dust, smell, suspended particles affect our daily routine. My children breathe this air, and the smell is horrible. And seriously, the smell is, you go in, and it's just chemicals. It's very strong, like fumes, and your eyes get really red. Some of the consequences of this are increasing criminality. So you have a lot of people coming in. So now criminality is increasing. Now they have problems of drugs and prostitution. Another interesting thing that one of the interviewees explained was that the students dropping high school is increasing because they're saying, I'm going to go work in the oil field. Like, I'm going to make a lot of money. Another, in informal conversations with a scholar, a worker in one of the blocks with no high school education makes 3 times the salary of a PhD professor at the university. So that's creating another problem. There's soil, air, and water pollution. sediments affecting the health of members in the community, a spike in the price of real estate. And that was interesting because, of course, I got a grant and I'm going there, so I'm going to split my time between Buenos Aires, and I think, okay, the capital city is expensive, and Neuquén. So I'm in the rural area, it should be less expensive. So just to give you an idea, an Airbnb apartment in Buenos Aires is about $1,200, $1,400 a month, dollars. In Neuquén, 4 nights in a hotel was $980. In Neuquén, not in Añelo. In Añelo, this is rural area, a shack is about $3,500 a month. Now prices are spiking. When I ask a member of the community, what are the problems that you see? That person stated, I don't feel secure in this town anymore. I lived here all of my life. My family, my grandparents and their grandparents are from Añelo. We used to know everybody. Now I don't let my kids play in the street or the plaza because they're strange people, drunk and high. That is not a good environment for my children. So this is an example of a contradiction. One of the contradictions of capitalism is particular what James O'Connor, a scholar who wrote a book called Natural Causes, in 1986, he published the second contradiction of capitalism. So the first contradiction of capitalism, as explained by Karl Marx, states that the economic system or the capitalist system has the tendency to accelerate the circulation of money and in doing so, they try to increase the revenue by reducing the cost associated with production. But in doing that, they're losing the people that can actually afford the prices of the commodities they're creating. So the first contradiction of capitalism states that even though they want to sell these processes, there is a problem of overaccumulation of money and underconsumption of resources. And so the first contradiction of capitalism is the tendency of the capitalist system to undermine its own economic conditions of production. The second contradiction of capitalism states that the capitalist system has the tendency to obliterate its own environmental conditions of production. So on the one hand, the companies investing money, accelerating the process, selling this stuff, making money, but on the other hand, is destroying the environment, affecting water and the health of the people. And so from an ecological Marxist perspective, it allows you to try to, in theory, explain this process. Another member described the issue associated with the increase in the price of food as follows. I can't afford to buy regular things like chicken, eggs, bread. It is really expensive. Now I have to wait for somebody to give me a ride to the city, which is an hour and a half away, to buy my groceries there. It is still expensive, but not as expensive as here. I don't work in the industry, so I can't afford to feed my family anymore. Just to give you an idea, when you go in, so sediments. So transportation, hundreds of trucks and semis just in and out from Neuquén to Añelo, and sediment. So Añelo is kind of the foothills of this mountain, right? And then the way the wind blows and the water runs by gravity, it bringing all of those sediments to the town. So the town is just getting all of this stuff. Chemicals when they get all of the backflow water, it's just all over the streets. These are chemicals. When you walk there, the fumes are so strong that your eyes get really red. I was just there doing this every day, just going for several days. I mean, I can't imagine how people can live in those conditions. And you see them, the kids playing. This is another photo that I took. Now, this is kind of the result of the fracking processes. But now let's look at the boom of the town. 15,000 people, they don't have the money to invest in infrastructure. That means sewage and water. It's not available. So now they have a shortage of water, and then they don't have the infrastructure to deal with sewage from 15,000 people. So that is mixing up with this stuff. This is the local radio station. Now, YPF has done several things. So, for example, in 2012, when they started, when they nationalized YPF, they said, okay, so we're going to invest in creating a new police station. They only have 3 police officers in town for 15,000 inhabitants. That was in 2012. Nothing has happened. They have another one saying, we're going to build a new school. 2016, nothing has happened. So the problem, however, is that they announced these projects 3 years ago, and the construction have not started yet. When I asked about this issue to a government official, the interviewee responded, "It's not that we don't want to build it. It's just that we're not getting the money promised by the provincial government. Fracking Vaca Muerta is more expensive than what they thought. Also, they have not been able to extract what they thought they would be able to extract. So there's no gas, which means no money to support the construction that they promised for Añelo." Now, you remember at the very beginning when I said, keep in the back of your head the differences between resources and reserves. Okay, the EIA, the Energy Information Agency in 2011, 12, and 13 said, Vaca Muerta in Argentina has the third largest in the world. They refer to recoverable resources. None of these deposits have been audited and approved, so they're just resources. They're not reserves. They can become reserves when auditors from the international community come in and they can prove that it's economically feasible to extract the resource and that in fact there is something out there. They haven't done that. So they started bringing all of the cavalry there. And nothing is coming out. And they're just like dumping millions and billions of dollars into this. But they hope that they're going to have access to it. This is the plaza. The reason why you see that there is because the sediments and the pollution has contaminated the soil. And so in order to avoid kids to playing in that area and get exposed to this, they just block it. The photo that I took was all the way up there. That's kind of the main road that takes you to Neuquén. So I'm taking the photo from up there. Now, remember the real estate stuff? Now they're coming up with this stuff, like these impromptu houses. And this is a good one, $3,500 a month for that one. And this is an oil worker. This is a person that works for Chevron. But you have like worse conditions. So in summary, fracking Vaca Muerta is more difficult than what they originally thought. There's structural problems with currency, devaluation, and inflation resulting from previous governments that are limiting the exploitation of underground deposits. There are several social, economic, environmental, and political challenges associated with this activity. And indigenous communities and members from the community of Añelo are experiencing the worst aspects of fracking in the region. So, some preliminary concluding remarks, highlighted, bold, underscore, italics, preliminary. Because I'm still analyzing the data. This is an example of the contradictions of capitalism mode of extraction. The process of uneven development that is happening in Añelo is not the result just of the fracking activity, but the consequence of a national strategy of reaching energy sovereignty. When you look at the metabolism of shale gas production, what I mean by metabolism, in the energy literature, they refer to it as the process by which you have inputs of production, so water and salt and natural resources that come in. You combine all of that to have something at the end, whether it is natural gas to be sold or fertilizers and pesticides. But in the process, not only that commodity comes out, but also pollution, heat, and waste. So the metabolism of shale gas production in Añelo is creating the consequences associated, and these processes are being distributed unevenly. And the deposits itself are presenting physical constraints that shapes fracking activities. So in this case, the physical and chemical characteristics of natural gas and the sedimentary rock itself is shaping the way in which it can be accessed and transformed. That requires a different set of laws and technologies and amounts of capital to extract it. And in general, in Añelo I find that environment-related social marginalization on the one hand and conflicts over ecological conditions of livelihoods on the other are not only the direct consequence of local processes of shale extraction, but these are also the end result of a systematic national strategy directed by a state to secure energy sovereignty. Questions?